Well, good evening. Like I said, we are so glad that you could join us for tonight's program. This is on, to most of us, a little known piece of Kappa history that includes a visionary project, a gorgeous home, a bold idea, and vacations in Florida. The timing feels perfect since, at least here in Ohio, it's snowy and cold. So while I love the winter, many of my friends and neighbors are dreaming of an escape to Florida right about now. And before I forget, I want to mention that most of our information tonight comes from newsletters written by previous historians. This one is specifically by Kay Larson, former fraternity president and former fraternity history chair.
Yes, so a big thank you to Kay. And now the dream we're talking about was called the Hearthstone. And it was planned as a vacation home for alumni in Winter Park, Florida. In fact, Kappa was the first and perhaps the only women's fraternity to attempt a project like this. And by the end of this presentation, I bet we'll have a few others who will suggest we try for it again.
I know I want to. The story begins in 1933. Imagine the world then. The Great Depression was in full swing, but even in challenging times, Kappas were thinking boldly. That year, the Grand Council voted to create a committee to investigate whether Kappa could establish a special vacation home for alumni, a place just for us.
The idea was ambitious, not a chapter house, not a meeting hall, a home, a place where Kappas could gather, stay, perhaps even live together later in life. At the 1934 convention, the committee's report recommended several things. The name should be the Kappa Clubhouse. The project should be self-supporting. It should be an alumna-led endeavor, and more research was needed to figure out how to actually build and maintain it.
So the next year, in 1935, the Grand Council voted to take preliminary steps toward planning a campaign for an endowment. That endowment would officially launch at the next convention. So by the 1936, Kappa established the Hearthstone Fund as an official gift fund and an alumna project. The vision was a lot bigger at the time. It was to create clubhouses, plural, across the country where Kappas could, quote, enjoy friends of common interest and a gracious home together. These houses would stand as memorials to the founders. Their hope for friendship and sisterhood that extends beyond college would literally be built into brick and mortar.
But here's the sticking point. No one could agree on the actual purpose. Would these be retirement homes for older Kappas or alumni chapter houses where Kappas of all ages could live temporarily on a cost-sharing basis? Trying to be both wasn't practical. But even with the uncertainty, the idea was exciting, and convention delegates loved the idea. They endorsed the Hearthstone Fund and approved naming the first home simply Hearthstone. Then came the fundraising slogan, one many of you may recognize from our long-running Stewart House fundraiser, be a brick, buy a brick.
Donations poured in. The very first donation check came from our first grand president, Tade Coons, and plans were coming together. Even though the original intention was to wait until a sizable endowment was built, Kappas got excited, maybe too excited. So in 1937, just 1 year into the campaign, Kappa authorized purchasing the Lee property in Winter Park, Florida for $25,000. This property became the site of the dream. A loan came from the Key Publishing Fund, and a local committee and board of trustees were created to operate the home. Back in 1936, part of the planning included having an alumni club house chairman in each association. But even that task wasn't fully committed to or completed. Hindsight is always 2020, but I'm pretty sure the finance committee wouldn't agree to this plan if we were to ask about it today.
No, probably not. But back then, it seemed like the sky was the limit. So on Founders Day in 1938, the first and only Hearthstone was dedicated. They even lit the fireplace with one of the famous ware candlesticks that would later be used at all chapter installations and convention candlelight banquets. The home was officially named the Boyd Hearthstone, honoring Mary Louise Bennett Boyd, the only recognized living founder at the time. We should clarify that founder Martha Louisa Stevenson Miller was also still living, but since she and Sue Walker couldn't make it to Minnie's house to sign the charter back in 1870, they weren't considered founders until much later.
No, so as you say, it wasn't until a few years later that they corrected the record and all six of the founders were recognized as such. And we know from at least one letter that Lou Stevenson kind of took it personally that she wasn't even considered or included in any of the honors. She lived further away in Kansas City, and Lou Bennett lived right there in Florida, but still, I'm sure it had to sting. Anyway, back to the Hearthstone. What a home it was. A gracious lakefront property furnished in antiques. It had room for 10 guests, plus a hostess manager. Palm trees, warm breezes, and the cultural life of Rollins College just down the road. That was a big selling point, and it still is today for retirement communities, especially if there's a college or university nearby. And Delta Epsilon chapter was installed at Rollins in 1932, so there was a newer and exciting chapter right in the neighborhood as well.
It sounds like paradise, and truly it was beautiful. The intention was for the home to operate year-round, but in practice, it was used only seasonally. That made planning and finances much harder. And remember, it was never designed to be a true retirement home. That mismatch of purpose lingered throughout its history. It was a lot more like a bed and breakfast.
So by 1960, more than 60,000 women had been initiated into Kappa Kappa Gamma. Now, this is for audience participation. Of those 60,000 women, how many do you think had ever stayed at the Hearthstone? You could
20.
shout it out. Did someone respond with one?
35. 20.
20, 35. 20 is
15.
closest. 50. 20 is closest, and you didn't hear that incorrectly. Fewer than 20 stayed at the Hearthstone. At every convention, the Hearthstone came up for debate. People loved the idea, but that love didn't translate to using the house or supporting it financially.
So in 1960, the Board of Trustees reluctantly recommended that the council, by then known as the Fraternity Council, be authorized to sell the property to the greatest benefit of the Hearthstone Fund. The council agreed, but it took 2 more years for the sale to finally go through in 1962.
The Hearthstone stayed open until the new owners finalized the purchase, and then heartbreakingly, they tore the house down. So Kappa salvaged what they could. Beautiful antique furniture was sent to fraternity headquarters. Some items were donated to Rollins College and to other local chapters. Other pieces were sold to alumni. And in the end, sadly, the liquidation raised $43,000. That was not even double the original $25,000 that was paid for the house in 1937.
A new house has been built where the Hearthstone was, and it's very similar in style and design to the original. We got to see it while we were working with Delta Epsilon's archives a couple of years ago, and we both agreed we'd vacation there. So what happened to the money? It was used to help restore fraternity headquarters, which had suffered severe fire damage in 1965. Yes, it was really cool. We kind of like snuck by it and tried to
I was
look.
going to say, I wrote that we got to see it.
We kind of saw it.
We, lurked at the end of their driveway and tried to take pictures. So in that way, with the money and the antiques helping to restore fraternity headquarters after the fire of 1965, the spirit of the Hearthstone and that goal of creating a home for Kappas lived on. But the larger dream, the nationwide network of alumni homes and the endowment that would sustain them, those were never realized. There was never a stable annual income as the 1934 plan had recommended, and the project never gained the full enthusiastic support of alumni associations. And perhaps most challenging, even more than the finances, was the difficulty of finding local Kappas who were willing to serve as board members and give the time required.
So despite the beauty of the location, the culture of Winter Park and Rollins, the efforts of so many, the Fraternity Council, the Hearthstone Trustees, committee chairs, etc., the Hearthstone simply never fulfilled its potential. And there's one other detail we forgot to mention. Second Grand President Charlotte Barawara was so caught up in the excitement of those early discussions, she announced she would deed her husband's ancestral home in Wareland to Kappa in order to open a second Hearthstone. That was in 1937, and a terrible hurricane in 1938 devastated the area and the land was never used. So that dream was also unrealized, and the fraternity sold Wareland in 1948.
So, what do we make of the Hearthstone today? Was it a failure or was it a bold idea that was simply ahead of its time?
Maybe both. What we know is this: Hearthstone represents something powerful about Kappa, a willingness to imagine big things, a belief in lifelong sisterhood, and the courage to try something no other women's fraternity had attempted.
And still today, whenever we talk about Hearthstone or the idea of something like it, people go crazy for the idea. So the original house and program is gone. The intention behind it, creating spaces where Kappas can live and grow and support one another throughout life, that really remains part of who we are.
So today we remember the Hearthstone not only as a house, but as a dream, a chapter in our history that reminds us of what is possible when vision meets action, even if the outcome is different from what was imagined.
And maybe it's a template for what to do and what not to do should we try something like it again.